All right, so it's the beginning of December. We are now in the home stretch here for the end of 2025, and just getting out of Thanksgiving. One of the things that as we were sitting around the table on Thanksgiving, one of the things that like really, looking across my family, it's been my wife, my kids, my mom, my sister were there. And just kind of looking back at the year, as well as like the years leading up to, the idea of what I'm thankful for. And then at that point I have a 18-year-old or 17-year-old daughter, almost 18, she's getting in her senior year at high school and is getting ready. We're already starting to look at schools. They're already sending things over. The idea that knowing that this is kind of the last year that she'll be full-time in our house, she'll be going off to college next year, and, which is bittersweet. I'm excited for her. At the same time, it's also, it's a bit hard when you're used to having, for the last 17, almost 18 years that this child has been in your house, to all of a sudden think next year she won't be there full time. And so really had me thinking, kind of like looking back and looking at all the things that I'm thankful for, and also realizing that this week, 3 years ago, I sat for my real estate exam, and, I was preparing to get into real estate. And so, and now looking back at the last 3 years as to like where we started and where real estate has put us now. And so I just wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of take a look at what was it that got us here? Why did I get into real estate? And then at that point, like that kind of, the overall journey of the things that you can anticipate and not anticipate in this business, and what makes it so much fun. So let's go ahead. Let's get into it. So yeah, 3 years ago this week, I sat for my real estate exam, and I remember being completely nervous in the fact of not just about passing the exam, but really about the idea of what passing that exam signified, because of the fact that I was about to enter into something that, even though I had a general understanding of how real estate worked, I understood how markets flowed and all of those things, the idea there was a lot of things that I knew I didn't know. And so what was the next 12 months going to look like? And there's fear coming out of, you're leaving a salaried position. I had a good paying job. And so at that point, like moving away from, what I would say comfort and security of a known paycheck every single month, even though you may not be 100% happy in the scenario where you are, the idea that like I do have a wife and I do have 2 kids that do rely on the fact that there has to be some sort of income moving in order for them to continue to have a roof over their head. So there's a lot of pressure sitting on this moment that I was like, outside of just passing the exam, was the idea of the adventure that I potentially was taking my family on. And so, but that the journey didn't start in 3 years ago. The journey actually started in 2021, because with a conversation with my wife around Christmas time, where I said I'd been thinking about real estate on and off for like 10 or 12 years, but I really didn't have the courage to bet on myself and go out and try to build a business for myself. I've been fortunate to work in positions and jobs that I enjoyed the job, but I didn't always enjoy the culture of what was within those organizations, the politics and all of those other things. I don't know how to play politics. I'm not typically good at those kinds of games. And so when they're played around me, it frustrates me. And the idea of, people jockeying for position. It wasn't always about how good you did the job. It was about how well you networked. And at that point, to me, I always looked at it the same way my dad did, which was keep your head down, do a good job. At the end of it, somebody will recognize it and you'll move on from there. And ultimately, it just wasn't moving in the directions that I wanted, where I had been fortunate to move up in positions, but then you would hit certain glass ceilings depending on the politics of that thing. And sometimes you being honest about how you see things wasn't always what somebody wanted to hear. And for me, when you're running a business for somebody, sometimes there's conversations you have to have that may not necessarily be the most, that they're not the best kinds of conversations, but they're the conversations that people need to have and need to be aware of, as opposed to at that point, having it turn back around on you at some point with a finger pointing that you did not give them that information. So anyway, I just been running through, I'd worked for a membership organization for years. I started as basically I managed a public seminar product line. We trained our members. We ran training programs throughout the country, typically in large hotels. After kind of the 2007, 2008 crash, the problem that, a lot of businesses themselves stopped investing into training because of the fact that the travel, hotel space, all of those different things became very, very expensive. And at the end of it, you're typically pull back on training first when business starts to move down or profits start to move down. So we had to figure out, as that product was basically one of the largest revenue generators for the business, how could we make this where it was more appealing, still cost effective for the businesses while we were able to continue to drive. So we had to reshape and rethink how we were doing these products. From that, I kind of led into the idea over time. I'd been there for about almost 8 years. I went from managing public seminars to managing the entire training portfolio from an operational perspective, and then coordinating, looking at ways to be able to build new business, new training products where it made it more effective, more cost effective. But the other is that we were really trying to drive engagement from our members. What we found was they would come to one training and then never come back to training again. Typically, it was the beginner audit training that they would come to, but they wouldn't come into any intermediate or advanced. So we were kind of losing them. And how can we connect the dots where it keeps them engaged with us, and that at that point, that we're able to continue to offer value as we went on. It was a super challenging job. There was a lot of travel that went into it. I was gone typically at times, 2 to 3 weeks out of the month, which obviously drove, it separated me from the kids and my wife. But the other was just the idea that it wasn't really satisfying me. And depending on where it was, you'd have, different points of view. You'd start moving into one strategy, and then somebody would come over, and now all of a sudden they're in charge of the department. And so at that point, now you're having to manage, kind of backtrack and reassess. I always felt like we were spinning our wheels in mud, and we are never actually able to move forward because nobody could agree on one specific strategy focus, making it where I felt like I was duplicating my effort over and over and over again and having the same conversations and getting nowhere. And so at that point, I decided I was going to leave. That led me to Amazon. I worked with Amazon. I was an operations manager at Amazon. A lot of my job prior to Amazon was focusing on product management, development, budgets, financial analysis. How are we going to grow revenue? How are we anticipating market share? What are we going to, how are we growing the overall business in order to drive revenue to the organization? I go to Amazon, instead of it being dollars, now it becomes hours and units. So it's, how are you going to move your headcount? We need to generate X amount of units into the building. We need to process. And then at that point, how are we safely putting these things away and organizing them? So you're managing direct inputs as well as support role functions. And how are you blending all of those together in order to be able to make it as effective and efficient as possible? I really loved the challenge of Amazon. I thought Amazon first of all, the interview process was incredibly difficult, but the challenge in terms of the job itself was there. The problem was it was 12-hour shifts. You worked your standard schedule was 4 days, 12 hours, but it would be where it came down to as production levels started to go. I'm in the middle of COVID. Amazon, as busy as Amazon was, it also required us to be able to work a 5th day, a 6th day. So it really started to grind from a time perspective. I started working overnights, then I moved to days. But I remember in 2021, I said to my wife, Steph, I really want to pursue real estate. This is what I want to do. And I want to spend, the next 12 months kind of preparing for that. And finally, after years of me bringing it up as if I was going, she just told me, she said, if you're going to do it, because I'm tired of hearing you talk about it. And that was kind of the beginning. So spending 2022, I interviewed agents, brokers. I talked to everybody I knew that had been in the business to kind of learn what I should understand. What do I need to do? What are the actions I should be doing? Where should I focus my effort as I prepare for this journey? All while also then at that point taking the classes and then sitting for the exam and then choosing a broker, where I was going to work, how I was going to do it, all of those things. But I remember sitting for the exam and thinking to myself, I hope I pass the exam, because the exam's not it's not, I would say, looking back, it's not difficult because I can say that now because I passed it. But leading up to it, there's a lot of things, I get exam anxiety. So it's always I'm always a little nervous, what happens if I don't pass and where am I going to go? And I had a deadline that I wanted to start real estate in January 1st, 2023. And so sat for the exam, got it, passed it in the first time on both the state and national exam, which I was surprised at the state exam. But the idea that now it was like, okay, well, this means now it's real. Like now you're in it. We spent Christmas, and I remember taking the kids, we went to a cabin for Christmas, and I ended up reading the book Millionaire Real Estate Agent and realizing, oh my gosh, I'm not just coming into a job. I'm not going to be just working as a real estate agent, but at the end of it, the understanding is that I am now a business owner. And that kind of changed my entire concept and actually made it a little bit more daunting for me in the idea of you're going to have to learn how to run the business. And knowing that, I was like, well, I know marketing, I know this, I know that, working in product management and product development, you have that. But what you don't think about is the fact that you also have people in those organizations that function and do those jobs. I'll be walking into a job where all of that is now on me. I'm going to have to understand, market, all of these things kind of came around full circle. And I remember being like, oh crap, there's going to be a lot more to this. So I'd started working with a business coach, a good friend of mine, Amy, who at that point really helped me understand, kind of break things down, into simplified means in the regards of how many people do you need to talk to on a daily basis, what's going on, and those kinds of things from a client acquisition aspect. And then over that year kind of helped me shape how to be able to leverage effectively in order to get there. But when I first got in, I remember thinking to myself, the first year, I'm not really worried about income. I'm really worried about learning and making sure that I'm doing the right things. I didn't want to jump too quickly. I didn't want to take on too much business and then at that point not be able to handle it. I didn't want to fail by moving too fast. So really going through the process and taking some of the pressure off of myself from a financial responsibility. That's what we spent 2022, just putting money away, knowing it could be up to 12 months before we actually make any money. But I didn't want that pressure I didn't want any client that I was working with to feel at the stress of all of these things, that in essence that I was desperate for the job and that I was willing to do whatever I was willing to say whatever I wanted to or whatever I needed to get that job. I wanted to make sure that I was doing it the right way and taking some of the pressure off my shoulders to effectively learn the business and learn all of the ins and outs, as you start, not just, what do you do when you get a client? Now, how does paperwork work? How are we going to market what we're going to do? And it took me probably about 4.5 months before I got my first client that at that point, was a listing that we were able to get it, get all the paperwork put together, get the photos taken together, make sure that we could market it. And then at that point, actually get it under contract and sold. And it was my first transaction was where I worked on both sides of the transaction. So it was dual agency, which I learned later I don't like dual agency, but the idea that I was not only managing my first transaction, but I was also managing both buyer and seller throughout the transaction, which there was a huge amount of learning that came from that. And so you're kind of leaning towards other people and experience to make sure that you're doing things the right way, all while not panicking the client to have them feel like he doesn't know what he's doing. It's not always about having the answers, it's about knowing where to get those answers and then managing the expectations from there. And we were able to get that close. And I remember thinking this is great. This is awesome. I think my first commission check was like a $3,500 commission check, and it took me 5.5 months to get to the closing table. But I don't think I was ever more excited about, the idea of what that commission check signified in terms of the journey to get there, and then from there, we really ran the second part of 2023. Things started to come together and we started I was able to win business and win clients that I still talk to today. The idea that the relationship mattered more than a transaction and that we were really trying to do something different, that we wanted to make sure that we were helping to advise our clients, all while being in 2023 where interest rates jumped as high as 8%. I mean, it was crazy, walking into not only new business, but walking into a business where at the end of it, the market looked like it was coming to a screeching halt. And here we are basically trudging our way through it, with no understanding of what a good or bad market is. It just happens to be the market that we're in. And so I think the second part, I think we ended up doing 8 or 9 transactions in year one, which was phenomenal in my opinion, considering the first 6 months I had no clue what was going on. And then all while that, like I decided that I was going to change brokerages, not once, but twice. And I do not recommend that. It is super expensive. It was a huge lesson learned, and I would never do it again. And at the tail end, it was like November of 2023 that I came to Remax. And I remember thinking, I'm going to interview every broker, and I'm going to make sure I'm not leaving that brokerage. I'm going to be there for basically, I'm going to be there indefinitely because of the fact that the pain of moving not just my business, but now my clients, and inconveniencing clients through the process, and just the hurdles that it takes to be able to transfer people back and forth was a real challenge. So, and it was costly, thousands of dollars worth of cost that was unnecessary had I just, made better decisions. But you don't know this when you're in there. And at the end of it, I probably should have done more due diligence in terms of who I was working for and making sure that broker aligned with my business mindset. And that's what brought me to Remax Moves. And that's why working with Cameron and our team here, he and I aligned very well together in terms of just kind of how we saw the business and how we saw technology and leveraging those kinds of things. And there was a lot of things that I felt like I could learn from him, which I learned a lot from him throughout over the last 2 years. I've learned quite a bit in terms, he's got 26 years of experience. So I'm lending that, and he's still active in the market. So it's not like he's telling you how he used to do it. He's physically having to do these things as well. So then 2024 hits, and we start off, a little bit slow. First quarter's a little bit slow, but yet the end of it, we doubled our client acquisition in that time frame. And I remember just being like, all right, now you're starting to get business, but now you're also having to do all these things, which then at that point, we're looking at working with my business coach, Amy, trying to figure out how we can do things where we're leveraging without, at that point, not losing money in the process. And so at that point, then we brought in, it was end of August, I brought Kaylin in, who is our marketing, our marketing director. She helped brand, she helps do events. She really helped with social media and understanding kind of all of, a lot of the marketing aspect of it. And then we also brought on a virtual, a administrative assistant virtually, who at that point helped with a lot of the paperwork and all of those things to at that point be able to manage through and leverage some of these things off so that we could effectively keep all of our clients, it makes sure that we're not losing anything in the cracks. And but what they don't tell you when you bring on leverage is the idea that now it's also there's two other people in the business that are also relying on you outside of your clients. Now you're also bringing in people that at that point also need time from you, need to understand there's training that needs to go along. So at that point, you're kind of having to put more on your plate, knowing that in the long run, it's going to be beneficial for both you, the client, and just the business as a whole. But that the idea is that there's also going to be a huge amount of investment of your time that takes away from business activities that are necessary. So that's a huge learning curve. The other was just the amount of money that you spend in this business is you can do it very lean. You can go crazy. The reality is this is like any other business. You need to invest in it if you want it to grow. You need to invest in your marketing. You need to invest in your clients in order to be able to get them to go. It's not 100% profit game. And if somebody tells you that, then they are fooling you, unless you are working with somebody where they're just feeding leads back and forth. The idea is that if as a solo agent, I work for myself, all of these costs and in order to acquire business come from me. So really looking at 2023 and 2024 and analyzing, hey, we really spent a lot more than we needed to. And so then moving into 2025, where I was like, hey, we're going to run this a little bit differently, and we're going to make some investments into certain things in order to be able to help us, tools, resources, technology that will benefit not only us, but our clients. And then coming in 2025, we hit right off the gate in terms of the number of contracts that we had put together leading from January, February, March. And really, we didn't slow down until probably June. And then we picked back up through the summer. And then the last quarter of this year has been surprisingly, even through all the noise and disruption and everything else like that, has been surprisingly good. But the difference is that your days on market are a little bit longer. So it's now all of a sudden trudging through kind of these ebbs and flows in the market over a timeline and what happened last year doesn't happen this year, and that how are you navigating that while also making sure that you're able to best advise your clients. But one thing that I've learned over the last 3 years, or the things that I think are the most beneficial over the last 3 years, is I absolutely love it. Like it's the most challenging job. It is not always easy in terms of where you think what you think would be, properties that you think would sell immediately. And then at that point, wondering why they're not, and having to navigate where you think you're pretty close on pricing, analyzing all of the different variables, whether, both past sales as well as who's your current competition, and being able to advise a client, knowing that you're making your best guess based on the information that you have in front of you today, but that tomorrow is a whole different market, and making sure that you're able to level set that with your clients ahead of time, that at the end of it, we're going to analyze it, understand it. We're going to give you our best. We're going to give you the best advice that we see. And at that point, the fact that we were able to have the success that we saw this year, where at that point, it's like, okay, it's a constant moving target, but I feel like we are tracking pretty close into that. We're able to follow it relatively closely. We're having to make some minor adjustments, but we're not making massive adjustments. We've been pretty close. And then at that point, looking at 23, 24, and 25 being some of the hardest years in real estate, they say, in the last 20 years, that we doubled our business in the beginning, in 2024. We doubled it again this year. And that goes off to the fact that we just have amazing clients that trusted us to help navigate them through this storm, through, this market that has been it's been crazy. And, you talk to agents that have been in the business for 10, 20 years, I guess their point of view is that the market's been bad. And so I watch some people where they just put their head in the sand and they're waiting until things get better before they go. The one thing about this is that you're constantly running triage throughout the process and making sure that you're making the best decisions, or that you're offering the best advice to help your clients make the best decisions in this market. And ultimately, nobody gets paid unless you actually get the transaction to the finish line. And I'm just super proud that this year, to be able to look back and say, wow, like we've seen growth, not just financially, but also just personally, from a knowledge standpoint, in regard, from a transactional knowledge, as well as just, market knowledge. To be able to see that, where, knowing that it's an everyday learning experience. There is no status quo. This is not how it was done yesterday, may not work today. And so you're constantly having to challenge yourself to try new things, look at things from a different perspective, things that you tried that didn't work. Maybe it's not that I guess the initiative was wrong. It was that the execution was wrong. Could we respin that, take a look at that in a different mindset? So it's one of those things where it was like, that was what I was looking for, getting out of security and comfort in salaried positions where it was somebody else's decision. Even if I didn't feel like it was the best decision, I didn't have the say or the authority to be able to make the change that I felt was necessary. In this business, I can do that every day. And so the idea of the flexibility and the creativity that you're able to, figure it all out together, and having now leverage with Kalen and Carlos, and then Amy as personal, our personal coach, that at that point is also an accountability partner to help keep things in track, but also understanding that each person that's involved with you also has, they have some input and ideas that at that point can make things even better that you may not have thought of on your own. So it's not always about being right. It's about having the right people in the right places and growing it from there. So I'm, as excited as I am about what we've done in 2025, what I'm really excited about is now at this point being able to take that and go out, and who will we be working with next year? Who will our clients be next year? What will, not just clients that we've worked with, but new clients, new people. And at that point, like continuing to learn through our clients on ways to be able to get better. And at that point, like, will the market be better next year versus this year? I don't know. And I can't control any of that. The only thing that we can control is making sure that we're staying on top of it to be able to get the best result for our clients in whatever they're trying to accomplish. And then at that point, can we help? So I am super thankful in the fact of for all of our clients that trusted us this year in 2024 and 2023. If it wasn't for their trust, none of this would be possible. You can have a great idea, but at the end of it, if nobody buys into what you're looking at or what your game plan or strategies are, you don't have a business. And so without those people, it wouldn't matter. And so I'm super thankful outside of my wife, my kids, my family, our friends, and everything else. I couldn't be more thankful for our clients and the idea of without them, this dream of mine that, started 13, 14 years ago. And then the idea of, getting licensed and getting started, it could have come to a very abrupt halt if at the end of it, we weren't able to, build our relationships effectively and deliver the results that we're looking for. So just wanted to give a little bit of insight. It's been a crazy year. We're coming down. I know there's only a couple weeks left really before Christmas. So it's one of those but we're already seeing traction into 2026. We've already got, we've got multiple things under contract that will close at the beginning of the year. And it looks like we're going to get off to a start in 2026 the same way that we did 2025. So I would just wanted to say happy holidays to everybody. And I hope that you enjoy this season, take a step back. Maybe there's things in your life that you're looking at and say, man, I'm grateful for that. And I'm thankful for it. I know I am. And honestly, without my wife's support, without that, her giving me the green light to go to successfully fall and fail in order to grow and learn and not hold me accountable for those failures outside of what are you learning and how are you not going to do that again. The idea is that it's been that flexibility and freedom and the ability to go out and do something and play in a sandbox and build something based on a vision that I had, what I felt was from a cultural vision. That's what I was looking for. So thank you, Steph, for that. And anyway, happy holidays to you guys. We'll do another topic next week, but I figured this was a good time and a good opportunity just to kind of look back, give thanks, and share some good news. Anyway, have a great week. I'll talk to you soon.